Hello, English 1301 students. It's Dr. Murray. I wanted to make you a video in which I talk about a few things. I guess the first thing I want to address is the thesis statement of the response section, and then talk about basically the historian Van Pelt and the chemist Roth, who I want to be part of what you discuss in this paper in the response section of your essay about Mr. Death. And so I'm going to address a couple of questions on the sheet of questions that just explains a little more thoroughly what we learned from them that's really important and what I want to get you to get into in your paper. So with regard to the thesis of the response section, I gave you some questions on the assignment sheet, like something like 4 questions. And, the first one is about Roth and Van Pelt, which is basically, what do they tell us that illustrates, the problems with the claims that Fred Leuchter's making. They make logos-based arguments that sort of counteract what Leuchter is saying, and it's really important to know what they say, because it's essentially proof from experts that Leuchter's research is not research. It's misguided. It's not. He's totally unqualified to do the research that he's claiming to have done. I'm not saying he didn't go to the concentration camps. I'm just saying what he did there is not worthy of the term research in the scientific sense. They are actually experts in their fields. Van Pelt in forensic history. He has a PhD. He has the training. He works in that field. Likewise, Roth, a chemist, has a PhD, works in that field. These are actual experts in their fields. So it's important to know what they're saying. Regarding your thesis, so my first question is, what do they tell us about what the problems are with Leuchter's argument? So answering that is going to be the first part of your thesis for the response section, and it will set you up to have 2 or 3 paragraphs in the body of your response section that explore what it is that Roth and Van Pelt tell us. Okay, and part of that is just to first make it clear that Leuchter's claims are false. They are not factual. Now, once that's established, then these questions come up, and I'm saying them off the top of my head, but you have them on my sheet. But they are essentially kind of, why doesn't Leuchter make these claims? Now, you could argue that he really thinks it's so, that what he's saying is so, and that's possible. But I even question how sure he really is that what he's saying is true. And to not be mysterious about it, I'll just say why, which is what's related to a later question, which is that Errol Morris essentially at some point in the film says to him, "Have you ever considered you might be wrong?" And Leuchter replies, "No, I'm past all that." Well, I can say that in science, the scientific method, an essential part of it is to test and retest your results. And when you're critiqued by an expert in the field, you're supposed to be willing, if someone points out a potential problem with your research, you're supposed to be willing to consider those critiques. And if you believe in it, the idea is, I'll run the test again, and I'm pretty confident we'll get the same result. Though if you don't, then you're supposed to be honest and say, that's a surprising turn of events. I didn't expect that, right? But you're not supposed to say, no, I'm unwilling and I'm past all that. That's not the spirit of science. It's not the spirit of logic. Logic, requires being tested with questions to find out whether you have a firm logical basis. To just, do the equivalent of sticking your fingers in your ear and saying, I don't want to hear it. That does not, to me, speak of confidence in your findings. That speaks of, I've got too much to lose by reconsidering my supposed research. So why does Leuchter make these claims? That's a question I think it would be a good one to address in this essay, or in the response section of the essay. Why, another one, why is he unwilling to consider whether he's been wrong? And another one is, what's going on with him? In a way you could say, what kind of guy is he? Or are there other things we've found out about him in the film? Whether it's his testimony about seeing an aura or an entity, his consumption of 40 cups of coffee and 6 packs of cigarettes a day, the fact that he changed his mind, according to Ernst Zundel, overnight regarding the Holocaust. Ernst Zundel says, I'm the one who wrote a book saying that the Holocaust never happened. And he's saying, it took me years to go from that I believed that it did to I changed my mind that he did it. He said, Leuchter changed his mind overnight. It just raises questions about what is going on with this guy. And then, another question that plays into that issue of what's going on with him is that thing that I mentioned in the questions here of, at one point, he's able to determine a statement that's not logical. That basically what he says is, I made electric chairs and then they asked me to make lethal injection machines. And he says, it's not logical to assume that just because you can do one, you can do the other. But then when he's a supposed expert in making electric chairs or execution equipment, and somebody says, oh, because you can do that, you should be an expert on determining whether or not the Holocaust happens. All of a sudden, his logical capacity to make that distinction evaporates, and it raises that question: why? Why was he able to make the distinction in the first place? Electric chair, lethal injection machines, but he's not able to make it regarding expertise when it's execution equipment and the Holocaust. I could answer it, but I'm not going to tell you my opinion. I'm going to let you say what you want to say about it. So with the time I have left, which is not very much, I guess I just want to say a few things about what Van Pelt and Roth tell us. Van Pelt, one important thing he tells us is about the archives at the concentration camps. I think it's important that Leuchter doesn't even know the archives exist, which tells us how little he's really looked into things. He just basically seems to have gotten on a plane with a hammer and some sandwich bags, and went to the sites. According to Van Pelt, Leuchter doesn't even know where he's hammering. He hasn't looked at the blueprints of the concentration camp because they're in the archives. Of course, he couldn't find in the archives what Van Pelt himself found in the archives because he doesn't speak German. This is Leuchter. And you could say, well, big deal. So Van Pelt speaks German. That doesn't make him better than Leuchter. No, but it makes him more qualified to do what he's doing, because part of the reason he knows German is he went into the field of forensic history to study World War II, and you have to know the relevant languages if your job is going to be to study physical evidence. And that's why it matters. And so when Van Pelt finds there proof that the Nazis in their internal communications spoke of gassing basements, well, that's real, actual research. And it's the research that Van Pelt has done, but that Leuchter knows so little he didn't even know to look into it. There's more to be said about what Van Pelt tells us, but that's a little hint, okay? As far as what Roth tells us, Roth is the one that processed the samples that Leuchter illegally obtained at the concentration camps. And he just sent them to Roth and said, here are some rock samples, test them for cyanide residue. And Roth said, I did my tests. There was no evidence of it. And from that, Leuchter said, oh, clearly then the Holocaust never happened. But when Roth found out the specifics and the context of the tests he did and found out what the samples were, where they came from, and all that, he basically says, Roth basically says, I didn't say the Holocaust never happened. I just said I didn't find any cyanide in there. But what he says when he finds out about what Leuchter did is he says, if there were cyanide, it would only be on the surface of the wall, whereas Leuchter was taking big chunks out of the wall. So thin on the surface that it's thinner than the width of a human hair. And everything else that's there behind that would just dilute the sample. So even if the cyanide was there, it wouldn't turn up in the test. That's why Roth tells us these tests are meaningless. In other words, these tests do not show that the Holocaust never happened, okay? Now, I'm just giving you a quick thumbnail sketch of it. But what I would say is the way your thesis is going to be in the response section is I really first want you to establish with a sentence, with a statement that's part of your thesis statement, telling us what Roth and Van Pelt make clear with their testimony in the film. And then I want another sentence or two as part of your thesis in the response section that answers some of those other questions, like, why did Leuchter make these claims? Why won't he consider whether he's been wrong? And what does all this tell us about sort of who he is or what's happened here? So I'm directing you and I'm asking you to do the thing about Roth and Van Pelt first, because I want it to be established early in your essay that, that Leuchter's claims are wrong, and how we know they are, because, the truth is, there isn't really any question about whether or not the Holocaust happened. Every university is full of, all over the world is full of historians. And, what is it, a conspiracy of every historian in the world all at once? The only people saying the Holocaust didn't happen are Nazis, neo-Nazis, white supremacists, etc. So, there isn't really a question. But nevertheless, Errol Morris did put experts near to show us, the problems with the evidence Leuchter put forward. And I just want what you say about Leuchter after that first statement to follow from the fact that you first established that his claims are wrong. I hope that's clear. The response section is 3 to 4 pages long, though I've had some students that want to make it a little longer. 5 pages, 5.5, something like that. Don't, if it's 6, you're overdoing it. The truth is, you could probably do it in 3.5, 4, if you do it very efficiently. That will be sufficient for that section. But I do want a clearer, you call it a thesis statement, but it will consist of more than one sentence, a couple or a few sentences, and and the order of those claims you're making in your thesis will dictate the order of your body paragraphs. First, you'll deal in, let's say, 2 or 3 paragraphs with the important things that Roth and Van Pelt tell us that make it clear that Leuchter's claims are wrong. And then you'll have some subsequent paragraphs. How many body paragraphs will you have in this section? That's up to you. In the summary, you'll have 3 body paragraphs, beginning, middle, and end, which should be clear if you watch my video. In this one, it's up to you to decide how. But make sure you have topic sentence at the beginning of each body paragraph to announce to the reader what the focus of the paragraph is, and to make sure that that what you're talking in that paragraph connects somehow to your thesis, to one of the 2 or 3 sentences that are going to be your thesis. I'm going to leave it there. Thanks.